I'm recording this video right before Easter 2021 and thought I would take the opportunity to reflect on the holiday from a philosophical perspective, and more specifically from the perspective of someone trained in philosophy of the mind. At the heart of Easter is the idea of resurrection. We celebrate the resurrection of Christ on Easter morning, and in so celebrating, we anticipate and hope for our own resurrection, our own bodily resurrection at the end of time. Now, at first, the idea of resurrection might be so familiar that it doesn't really raise any suspicions, or it doesn't really raise any new ways of thinking for us. I want to suggest, though, very briefly, that the resurrection resists two of the most common human anthropologies, that is, two of the most common ways of understanding who we are that are out there today, both in the philosophical community, but also just in the everyday person on the street. Consider first the idea of physicalism or materialism. According to physicalism or materialism, who we are, who you are, who all of humans are, is nothing at the end of the day more than the physical stuff that composes us. What we are is what we see and feel and hear, the stuff that we can touch directly. That's all there is to who we are, the physical, material aspects of ourselves. Now, of course, the resurrection resists that way of understanding ourselves. It suggests that there's more to life, that there's more to human existence than merely the physical world that we live and breathe in now, but that there really is some sort of future hope for heaven and resurrection that we can look forward to, and that we have this hope through the resurrection of Christ. So I think that the resurrection really does resist any sort of simple, physicalist, reductive kind of materialist view of who we are as humans. But the second narrative that the resurrection resists is, I think, a less obvious one, but maybe even more important one because it's less obvious. In particular, the Christian idea of resurrection also resists a dualist version of human anthropology. It resists the idea that who we are is some sort of immaterial spirit merely inhabiting our bodies. I like to sometimes talk about this as the Looney Tunes version or the Looney Tunes theory of human identity, right? Some of you might have grown up watching Looney Tunes. You know that when a Looney Tunes or really any cartoon character dies on screen, their spirit kind of gets this little ghosty thing that kind of emerges out of their body and floats on up to heaven. And I think that's the view a lot of folks have of who we are as people, that who we are is this kind of ghost, this kind of immaterial thing that lives inside our bodies. The resurrection, however, resists that version of ourselves as well. Why? Well, the resurrection, as understood by traditional Christianity, is very much a bodily resurrection. It's the bodily resurrection that the early Christians proclaimed of Christ. It's a bodily resurrection that Christianity teaches we can look forward to in the world to come. But if resurrection is a bodily concept, well, that kind of resists the idea that who we are is something purely immaterial. If we were something purely immaterial, after all, why would we have any need whatsoever of a bodily resurrection? If we were purely immaterial, who we are could just float on up out of our bodies right up to heaven immediately after we had died. We would already be where we wanted to go. There would be no need for a bodily resurrection. And yet, at Easter, we celebrate precisely the bodily resurrection of Christ, and we anticipate with hope the bodily resurrection of ourselves. So I think that Easter and the idea of resurrection not only resists this simple physicalist, materialist worldview, it actually maybe more unexpectedly resists this dualist worldview, that who we are is merely immaterial spirits. What's more, I think that those two worldviews account for the vast amount of folks just walking around every day in the streets. Many people would think, if you were to ask them, who are you? They would either say, I'm either nothing more than the matter that composes me, or I'm something purely immaterial. I'm merely a soul in the vessel of my body. What then does Christianity teach? And what does the resurrection and what does Easter ultimately point us to? Well, it points us to the traditional Christian teaching that what people are is neither purely something immaterial nor something merely material. Rather, according to Christian teaching, and this is the teaching that the resurrection and Easter points to directly, what the human being is soul and body together. What we are, in other words, is not something completely material. We're not merely a body, like the rocks on the ground or the table that I'm standing at right now. That's not all we are. We're not something purely material. And so the physicalist, the materialist, gets it wrong. But nor, and importantly, nor are we merely a soul, nor are we merely something immaterial that inhabits our bodies. Rather, we are soul and body together. We are something immaterial in being soul, but we are a soul that is essentially embodied. And it's from this perspective, and not from the perspectives of physicalism or from dualism, that the resurrection and Easter make sense. For if what we essentially are, what you and I are at heart, is soul and body together, well then, death, bodily death, need not be the end in the way it might have to be for a physicalist. Why? Because we're not merely our bodies. However, the resurrection, and a bodily resurrection, becomes crucially important in a way that it never could be for a dualist. For a dualist, again, if your floaty self floats on up to heaven after you've died, there's really no need for a bodily resurrection. You're already up there in heaven. If, however, you adhere to the traditional understanding of the human being as soul and body together, then while our physical death may not be the end of our soul, for us to be in heaven fully as ourselves, we need our body back. And it's that body coming back to us that's precisely proclaimed in the Christian doctrine of resurrection and in the holiday of Easter.